Alright, here's a sheet of problems that I would like you guys to look at. Usually I'm going to ask you to pause the video and work out the questions yourself. If you feel confident about this material and you want to try this yourself, go right ahead and pause the video and fill in all these answers. I hope you understand what I'm asking here. I want to take this number. I want to round it to the nearest tenth, first of all, and write the answer here. And then I want to round this to the nearest hundredth, and write the answer here. And then round it to the nearest thousandth, and write the answer here. And then repeat that for these three numbers here. So there's really 12 questions here. And but if you don't feel confident on doing the questions yet, that's no problem. I'll be happy to explain this. And then on the next video, I'm going to have you try to do it yourself first. Okay, it's really important you try to do the problems yourself because that's really the best way to learn, and it's all right to make mistakes, of course. It's the way we learn. But for this one, let's just do it together, and we'll get good at it. And then you'll be confident to do it on your own. Okay. So let's take this number. Let's fill in all these answers first, okay? Let's round each of these to the nearest tenth, and then we'll move on to the other questions after. Now the tenth, okay? That's this decimal spot right here, isn't it? It's the first one to the right of the decimal point. And let's go over that procedure again. This is called our rounding digit because it's in the tenth spot. We look one over to the right from the rounding digit. Now this is a 6, okay? If this number here is 5 or more, in other words 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, and it is, right? That means we have to increase this guy by 1. We have to increase the rounding digit by 1. So this is going to become 3.3. And then we chop off the rest of the number, okay? The 6, 4, 8 we don't care about. Okay, how about on this one? Here the rounding digit is the 9, the 10th spot. We look one over to the right from the rounding digit, it's a 2. So that tells us if this number here is smaller than 5, like 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and it's 2, then we just leave that alone. We leave it as a 9. Instead of trying to increase it by 1 like we did up here, we just leave it alone, 27.9. That's our answer. Okay, the rounding digit on this question is the 6, because it's in the 10th spot. We look one to the right from the rounding digit. Here's a 4. Since this is smaller than 5, I know that I'm just going to leave this as a 6 and chop the rest of it off. So the answer is 8.6. Here the rounding digit is 1. I look to the right of it and I see a 2 there. Since that's smaller than 5, I know my answer is just going to be 5.1. Good. Now let's round all of these to the nearest hundredth. The hundredths is this second digit from the right of the decimal point, right? It's a 6. So this is our rounding digit. We look one to the right. That 4 there, since it's smaller than 5, tells us just to leave that 6 alone. So our answer is 3.26. Here the rounding digit is the 2. As usual, we look one to the right from the rounding digit. Okay, that's 7 there. It's 5 or more, isn't it? So that means I have to increase this by 1 to make it a 3. 27.93. The rounding digit on this one is this 4 right here. We look one to the right. Since this number is smaller than 5, we know that we're just going to leave this 0.64 alone and chop off the rest. So the answer is 8.64. But if this number here, this second 4, if this was actually a 5, then we would have had to increase that by 1 and make it a 5. So it'd be 8.65 in that case. All right. The rounding digit on this question is the 2 here. This 7, being 5 or more, tells us we're going to have to bump that up by 1 to make it into a 3. 5.13. Now let's round each of these to the nearest thousandth. The rounding digit is going to be the 4 now. We look 1 to the right, as always. That 8 is 5 or more, isn't it? So that's telling us to make that into a 5, one larger than 4. So the answer is going to be 3.265. On this one, the rounding digit is a 7. We look 1 to the right. That 4, since it's smaller than 5, tells us just to leave the 7 alone and chop off that 4. So it's 27.927. Great. The rounding digit is right here, the 4. We look 1 to the right. That 9 there is bigger than, is 5 or more, so that tells us to increase that by 1. So it's 8.645. On this one, the rounding digit is a 7. We look over 1 digit to the right. That 3 is smaller than 5, so we're just going to leave that alone as a 7 and chop off the 3. 5.127. Good. If you understand these exercises, then you're in pretty good shape for rounding. Except there's a little style of question in rounding which some students find difficult, and I like to call those kind of questions tricky nines. Okay, tricky nines in rounding. And I want to review that a little bit before we go to our worksheet, so that you're ready for that. So let's get a new sheet before we continue. All right, let me ask you to do this question. How about round the number 5.296 to the nearest hundredth? Oh, I don't need the S there. How do we do this problem? Round this number to the nearest hundredth. Well, if we follow the way I talked about in the last part of this lecture, we identify the rounding digit. It's right here, right? This is the hundredths. And we look 1 over to the right. If this number is 5 or more, then we need to increase that by 1. But if this number is less than 5, then we just leave it alone, okay? Well, this number is 5 or more, right? 6 is more than 5. So that means we have to increase this by 1. But it's a 9. How do I increase that by 1 when it's already as large as it can be to be a single digit, right? If I increase that by 1, it's a 10. And I don't want to write 10 in there. So if this ever happens, this is what we have to do. We say to ourselves, well, this being 5 or more tells us we want to increase this by 1. But since it's a 9, I can't. So what you do is you go to the next digit, okay, and see if you can increase that by 1. And 2, we can increase that by 1. We're going to make that into a 3. So our answer is going to be 5.3, and don't stop there. You have to put in a 0 for that, okay, for that rounding digit. 5.30 is the answer that we're looking for. And putting that 0 in is important because that shows that you've rounded to the nearest hundredth, because the hundredth spot is not just blank, is it? There's a 0 there, so that signifies something. Now, let's just try a couple more examples, and that'll make it more clear. So let's round each number here. I'm going to write them down in a second. To the nearest hundredth. The first one is going to be 17.496, 17.996, and 19.997, say. Okay, so what are the answers going to be? Let's take a look at the first one. We identify the 100 spot. It's the 9, right? We look 1 to the right. That 6, being 5 or more, tells us we have to increase that by 1, right? But it's a 9, so we can't. So what we have to do is we have to move to the next spot to the left and see if we can increase that by 1. And we can. It's a 4, and we can make that into a 5, right? The only time we can't increase it by 1 is when it's a 9, right? So that the answer here is going to be 17.50, right? That 0 is important. How about in this one? Well, the rounding digit is here, the 100 spot. And we look 1 to the right. This 6, being 5 or more, tells us that I have to increase this by 1. But I can't. So I look 1 more to the left. And can I increase this one by 1? No, I can't. So I just keep going. Here, can I increase this one by 1? Yes, I can. I can make that into an 8. So it's going to be 18.00. Okay? And again, those zeros are important. If we round to the nearest hundredth, we better have a digit in the 100 spot and nothing afterwards. This one here, the rounding digit is the 9, the 100 spot. We look 1 to the right. It's a 7. That's 5 or more, so we have to increase this by 1, but we can't. So we continue on to the left. Can we increase this by 1? No, we can't. Continue to the left. Can we increase this by 1? No. But finally, when we go to the next one, we get a 1 and we can increase that. So that's going to become a 2, right? And what are the rest of the digits going to become? Zeros, exactly. So 20.00. All right. So that comes up sometimes, those 9s, and a lot of students get confused on that. So I just wanted to bring those to your attention. And I think we're ready to try the worksheet now. Or the work, it's not really a sheet, it's just I'm just going to write some questions on the screen here, and I'd like you to try them yourself before watching me solve them. Okay, so let's take up that now.